Watergate.
I'll be at the Watergate.
Watergate Hotel?
Watergate effect.
Think Watergate.
The Watergate guy.
Watergate.
They lied about Watergate.
Speaking of Watergate.
Operation Watergate?
Watergate?
It's not exactly Watergate.
And Watergate.
More snitches than a Watergate.
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 It happened at a hotel, I know that.
Welcome to Peter Klein Presents Fix the Media. You know it, and I know it. The damn media is corrupt. On this show, I analyze and critique the news media and the entertainment media and historical narratives to determine what's real and what's fake. I am your host, Peter Klein, and this is episode number... Oh, I gotta get it. 14. This episode is entitled Woodward and Bernstein, Two Nuts in the Media Turd. In other words, they are both pieces of excrement, which is not at all what the historical narrative tells us. 95% whatever of Americans probably think that Watergate is the story of two intrepid reporters who broke the story of criminal acts by the Nixon administration, the horrible Nixon. He's not a crook, right? Read my book. Anyway, and that leads to his resignation. I myself once accepted that heroic tale as true for the most part, and I no longer do. I've extensively unpacked the Watergate story, and their later, the later reporting of Woodward and Bernstein, or as I like to call them, Bernward. See, that's a good one. I haven't heard that one. It's time to take stock and expose this media myth for what it is. Now, I am, first of all, very hungry. You might hear my stomach growling. I'm committed to the extent that I will postpone dinner. It is now 10:16 in the evening, Pan-Pacific time. Anyway, I am constantly struggling with conflicting aims. Do I eat? Anyway, do I report on current events, critique present-day news, or do I report on historical events, historical news reporting? There are benefits both ways. When reporting on past events, lessons learned can be used for future analysis or to determine future actions to take, right? If we can connect past historical events and reporting with present-day events and reporting, it may result in a demystifying of current events that puzzle us. And it's not as if there's anything going on right now that puzzle us. So just, put this in your back pocket in case things become unusual, in case things become like a circus world or something, right? But, whenever that happens. Anyway, is it possible that reporting from the Watergate era could help demystify puzzling present-day reporting and events? I think it can. That's what's in store for you and me in this episode. I'm not claiming to completely solve any mysteries. I'm not quite able to connect certain dots here. So if demystifying is too strong a word, then it's safe to say I will at least shine a brighter light on puzzling present-day events. Okay, so as we begin to focus on the elements of our story, two people in particular feature prominently in the news media across time, beginning in the Watergate era and persisting until this day. Bob Woodward and Carl Bernstein. So what I'm going to do is defrock these disingenuous and pathetic media darlings, and as nothing more than a bonus, a value add, I figure I'm also going to go ahead and tear down the Watergate myth. Now, just to be clear, I have done a ton of research over the years, but I will not watch that damn All the President's Men for a number of reasons, not just because of Robert Redford. So if that film is the penultimate expose revealing all, the nature of time and space itself, our purposes in life, anyway, then I'm wasting your time and you're wasting my time, and we should probably not do this. But I have a feeling that film is probably not as accurate as some might suppose. So, let's go straight to the mythos and just identify roughly what it is that, Watergate's all about. And then we're going to back into some of these figures. On June 17th of 1972, 5 burglars were arrested in the Democratic National Committee offices in the same building as the Watergate Hotel. Now, next, the 5 burglars and 2 others plead guilty or are convicted as a result of that burglary, quote unquote. Almost a year later to the day, literally I think the 16th, the existence of a White House taping system is revealed. Okay? Then fast forward another year. On August 5th, 1974 now, the smoking gun is found in transcripts of the tapes where Nixon instructs the FBI to ask the CIA to not interview witnesses. Basically, there's obstruction going on, okay? And then immediately 3 days later, Nixon, for whatever reason, because you can never believe anything a president says, resigns. And lastly, in our little brief synopsis, the next month, Jimmy Carter pardons Nixon, okay? Pretty convenient when you think about it. I didn't realize how quickly he had done that. Now, to clarify, Nixon exited the presidency not through impeachment, but by resigning. The reason for this resignation was directly tied to the transcripts of some things said on those tapes. The timing of events makes this almost a certainty. However, this doesn't eliminate any ancillary motives. For example, Nixon may still have realized from other events and other communications that the fix was in, to put it, to use a phrase. Now, I also want to interject here for just a moment regarding the White House taping system. It existed back in the Roosevelt era, but required a switch to operate it, right? You had to manually turn it on and turn it off. Nixon was the first to go nuts, and he added a voice activation feature. But as I've asked people for many years now, why would a president bug himself? It doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Oh, sure, it can be very useful in accounting for what people say, for transcriptions, or for leverage against other people. But might it have been a condition or a requirement of presidents like Nixon? It reminds me of how BlackBerries were a requirement until Obama and Hillary went off the reservation with iPhones, right? But there was a little bit of a scandal there, right? Because only BlackBerries were authorized. And why was that? Oh, because they were secure. Or was it because they were absolutely being surveilled, right? By who knows how many people? Who knows how many Tartarian knights and kings would be sitting there in a cloud with their headphones listening to Obama talking about, hey, I can't dance and I can't play b-ball. Anyway, LBJ may or may not have known his call to a tailor requesting more lightweight pants to be made by this tailor for him, but with more dangle room in the dangle area. Let's listen.
Y'all made me some real lightweight slacks that he just made up on his own, sent to me 3 or 4 months ago. It's a kind of a light brown and a light green, rather soft green and soft brown. I need about 6 pairs to wear around in the evening when I come in from work. I want them 1/2 inch larger in the waist than they were before, except I want 2 or 3 inches of stuff left back in there so I can take them up. I vary 10 to 15 pounds a month. The pockets, when you sit down in a chair, the knife and your money comes out, so I need it at least another inch in the pockets. Yeah. Now, another thing, the crotch down where your nuts hang is always a little too tight. It's just like riding a wire fence. These are the best that I've had anywhere in the United States.
Okay, those are the key events chronologically. I think it's important to add a couple other interesting elements, though, that wind up having significance in retrospect. So, and those are as follows. First, Nixon is never proven to have called for or even known of anything about that break-in, okay? It wasn't until after the arrests of the burglars that he became aware, okay? That's pretty much agreed upon by a lot of these folks on both sides or all sides. Neither the media, the administration, or the committee prosecutors ever determined a motive for the break-in. And we're going to have to touch on that. Before the break-in, Nixon handily won his campaign against McGovern for a second term. He slammed it, okay? So it wasn't about trying to secure another term. He'd already done that. And yes, it was McGovern he was up against, who had selected Mayor McCheese as his vice president. So we're left to speculate about how many burglaries would have been committed by the Hamburglar. All right, before continuing to deflate Watergate, let's now defrock those famous Washington Post reporters. First up, Bobby Woodward. Does his backstory even add up? And either way, why does everybody accept Woodward without question? That's an issue. We're going to need to look into that. And we also need to watch that we don't accept any of this without question. So let's ask a few. Think about it like this. What else could explain how these bad boys of media got away with highlighting establishment flaws? Surely the powers that be didn't want the public to see the president himself colluding with other agencies, the FBI and the CIA. So the Washington Post begrudgingly ran the controversial reports, thereby legitimizing Woodward? After all, there must be legitimate journalism, right? There are, and their name is Whitney Webb. Well, she's one example, American journalist, allowed to continue living with the conditions that she reside in Chile and she not be allowed an audience beyond obscure blogs. If a poll asking Americans who she is turns up higher than 1% do know her, then pew pew pew, space lasers for you. And isn't it just more believable when you've got not one, not two, but actually it is two journalists instead of just one. Frankly, I don't get around that much, but I can't think of any other well-known media duo like Woodward Bernstein. It's kind of like, what, do they come as a pair? It's a set, right? I don't really get it. But I kind of get it if you're trying to make these guys like, oh, well, if you don't like one of them, you're going to like the other guy. Or vice versa. So together, they form the perfect example of journalism in action, right? But I'm afraid that Woodward is very likely a product of military intelligence, industrial complex forces. Here he is, reading the paper in his Georgetown backyard, okay? Question, does this photo look odd to you? I mean, yeah, it's got very unique lighting sources kind of converging on the setting, but still, those ceramic pots, they sure look like they aren't in compliance with the dimensions of the scene, right? With the three-dimensionality of things, at least in the reality of the backyard of this Woodward person. Anyway, same with the pair of shoes. Bob looks almost like he's in a human-sized terrarium. No matter. So Bob graduated from Yale in 1965. Yale is a very connected school and prominent hub of recruiting into various outfits. He was one of just a few seniors to be picked for the Book and Snake Society. I suspect that is one tier below Skull and Bones. Now, during this time, he gets in 4 years of ROTC training. Cool. So 3 days after graduation, he shockingly joins the Navy, heading to Norfolk, Virginia, where my grandfather was stationed, but earlier than that. And he's immediately commissioned an ensign. His first commission is on the USS Wright, also known as the Floating Pentagon. Wow, what luck. It was designed as a floating central command for the president and his cabinet in the event of war, specifically a nuclear war. He was a communications officer and had high security clearance. A naval officer of the time said, nobody gets out of going to Vietnam in 1968. But Bob did, being stationed after 2.5 years on the USS Fox in Southern California, running the ship's radio team. Now from there, Bob is assigned to the Pentagon, Both an admiral and a secretary of defense have stated that Bob briefed the likes of Alexander Haig at the White House. Woodward denies this. So it's his word versus an admiral and a defense secretary, right? Leaving the Navy, Bob is accepted at Harvard, but it puts it aside and kind of declines it and decides instead, hey, maybe a job as a reporter would be more fun or more to his liking, play to his skill sets. So he pops over to the Washington Post and interviews with none other than Ben Bradlee, who is the top dog at the Post and former intel operative at the Office of Naval Intelligence and CIA. One could assume that it wasn't just a lark, but more like an assignment to a new duty station working for a fellow agent. Now, supposedly, Ben hires Woodward for a 3-week trial period. Maybe he didn't pass muster because after 3 weeks, he winds up as a reporter for the Montgomery County Sentinel in Maryland. Now, I didn't choose to take the time. I figured it would take to possibly determine the legitimacy of this weekly paper. Supposedly, it's published from the 1860s, sometime back then, through 2020 when it goes out of print. It goes online exclusively. Now, here is an actual photo of, oddly enough, a newsstand carrying the paper. This is a weekly paper, okay? And I'm familiar with these weeklies. I've actually worked for a weekly newspaper myself in the Bay Area. All right, but there are some who speculate this limited weekly newspaper was whipped up to support the reporting career of Bob Woodward, the equivalent of sealing Lincoln's childhood cabin with plexiglass or reframing a senator's trip to Bangkok for sex with underage girls, turning that into the story of a friendly charity trip in which he also attends a friend's wedding, right? It's just this kind of thing. It's just tweaking the elements. It may sound ridiculous, but it is exactly the expertise of intel guys and of general PR guys in general. So after a year at this Sentinel weekly paper, Woodward is back at the Post working for Ben Bradlee, but now he gets a partner, Klein Bernstein, and Watergate commences. Now, Woodward has authored numerous books after his famed collaboration on All the President's Men. State of Denial, Maestro, Veil, The War Within, The Choice, and even Wired, which is his biopiece on John Belushi. Now, his latest book is Rage, about Trump. Okay, I love how on the cover it's really high def and you can see every pore and every little facial hair that wasn't perfectly shaved that morning. It's real classy to do a book like that and make sure the president's, really get in there tight on it. Hey, man, it's all about the truth in journalism, right? Get in tight. I want to go all the way up in his nasal cavities and see what's going on up in there, right? What's the truth about that? It's critical. Anyway, it's through his books, through Woodward's books, that another area of evidence emerges that delegitimizes his reporting, okay? Even on topics that don't pose any conceivable interest to intel, Woodward plays loose with the facts and misquotes. Even worse, I think, are his inventions in whole cloth. For one example, his repeated claim of obtaining an admission of Iran-Contra wrongdoing from former CIA Director William Casey. Now, his story usually involves disguising himself as an orderly and sneaking into Casey's guarded hospital room without detection to hear Casey's admission, despite his only being able to grunt and moan, if he was conscious enough to do that, given his poor condition. Everyone knew it was impossible. It may have been a jump the shark moment, where Bob had simply gone too far. Or maybe he's going too far the whole damn time. But we've got to figure out, we need a gauge to know if that's true or not. Could be. Don't rule it out. Now, whenever confronted about his reporting follies, Woodward's defense is always denial or other wordplay. When a colleague was writing a bio on Bob's boss, Ben Bradlee, at the Washington Post, Bradlee allowed the author full access to all his notes. In them, Bradley expresses true concerns about some aspects of the Watergate reporting, including even the existence of Deep Throat. Okay? The author, Jeff Himmelman, claims that this is Bob Woodward, actually threatened him to remove Bradley's doubts from this book he was writing, which is this bio thing. It's supposed to be the facts, right? It led to a fallout between the two. Now, that's Woodward in a nutshell. We're not done entirely, but let's just slip on over to old Carl, because Carl's a little more of a enigma. He didn't enjoy the kind of fame that Woodward did. Okay. Now, fortunately for us, I won't spend near as long defrocking Bernstein, although in some ways Carl seems even more dishonest and self-interested than Woodward or Bernward. To begin with, Bernstein was once married to Nora Ephron. Okay? There's that. But maybe worse than that, he was born to parents who were both activists and communists. He was a red diaper baby. He probably is on the record proudly proclaiming his red baby diaper. From there, his career in journalism looks mostly reasonable. He starts work at the Washington Post in 1966 and becomes a talented reporter in the ensuing years. It looks like Carl may actually not have been a creep until after Watergate. Then he goes full Hollywood. And I can only assume that, but I haven't confirmed, that he at one time snorted crushed up birth control pills off the dance floor at Studio 54. I'm only assuming, but I haven't verified this. Even though he looks to have been enjoying his fame, he still hits some high points with great and detailed features on the Pope and Reagan, the CIA's Mockingbird media, and even criticism of modern media as being kind of crutch for the public's addiction to vain, pointless puffery. Right? Pointless Puffery. It's a good band name. But as fate would have it, Bernstein has a sudden shift in politics, personality, constituency, and ethics around the 2006-2007 time frame. Okay? So in 2007, his book on Hillary Clinton, A Woman in Charge, comes out. And it hits the bestseller list. But an end-of-year report showed it only sold between 50 and 60,000 copies. You know, and I think they put their first order in, the publisher was for 260,000 copies. So they might have ate almost 250,000 of these damn books with good old Carl on there, loving on Hillary Clinton, and the publisher going, this is money, this is the economy, this is our livelihood. Who is this man, what are we doing, and all that? Well, who's to blame? Don't blame me, publisher. Around this time, Carl begins a new shtick in which he has only two settings. One is compare everything to Watergate. You know, this BLT is worse than Watergate. And two, loudly criticize all things conservative, up to and including, especially including anything Trump related. All things conservative meaning traditional family values, individual rights, and most curiously or tellingly, distrust of government. So Bernstein is still out there in force, switching settings between his two modes and constantly Trump bashing, right? He seems almost incapable of realizing the hyper hypocrisy and seeing that he's become the enemy of what he used to defend most vigorously. It might help to put a big black bow on Bernstein's bullshit by knowing who he's dated through the years. Bianca Jagger, Elizabeth Taylor, and Martha Stewart. Despite having very little influence, investigative influence in the Watergate fallout, the media is still a key element of the story. Some suspect that the relentless reporting of the scandal applied necessary pressure at just the right times to encourage government agencies to pursue their prosecutions and to basically do their jobs. And I'm not sure that I disagree or agree with that. To me, I think, well, it's one of those, how do you know? We can't go back in time, or at least Matthew McConaughey, I think, anyway. It's in a Cadillac, anyway. Or Lincoln. That's right. It's a Lincoln. That's the time machine car. If true, though, that the media had this effect, then the media to some degree performed its intended role as the fourth estate. And that term, fourth estate, comes from it comes from thousands of years ago, before the branches of the American government were formed. But the concept remains the same back then as it does in our system of government. The executive, the legislative, and the judicial branches of government are designed to function as checks against each other. It's built in. This is a granted authority to each of them, but also it's mandated as requirements for the functioning of government. So it's kind of like it's supposed to be kind of a holistic, homeopathic ecosystem, okay? So when the president nominates someone to the Supreme Court, the Senate must review and vote on that nomination in the best interests of the American people. They aren't allowed to defer to their party leaders or their financiers, but they do. Actually, I think that these checks, including vetoes, overrides, appointments, amendments, anyway, they're really not effective at preventing abuse of power, at least under day-to-day business as usual conditions. Partisanship, ideology, self-interest, and a lack of public engagement, right, allows for sidestepping the system. And usually this happens with implicit or tacit cooperation between different branches. Enter the fourth estate. So theoretically, the fourth branch of government exists to check this type of corruption or basic negligence, more so where the public is tuned out and shirking their responsibility. Now, when a media outlet publishes an expose revealing that Congress or some department of government is acting unlawfully, going around the system, right, where checks and balances can't catch them, then they are acting as a check against one or more of the three branches. They are bound to do so freely, so long as they do it in the interest of the people. So when dozens of CNN staff went on a bender reporting how racist Donald Trump is, presumably that would benefit you and I. I didn't even know that, and I certainly don't want my president reacting to such partisan boondoggles, right? But if there wasn't really any evidence of racism, and most of the reports were just suppositions or rumors, does that serve the interest of the people? Trump was, in my opinion, savvy enough to start labeling these media scams as fake news. And they absolutely hated it, especially Woodward and Bernstein, who actually jointly made a speech or two to denounce it. Trump seems to have been over the target, as they say. It's almost as if he was functioning as a check against corruption of the media. But that's not technically true. In fact, the three branches of government don't include any function to check the so-called fourth estate. With the freedom to literally publish fake news, combined with a more cutthroat media economy, the media manifested a literal clown world. Now, how it became solidified was when the media not only lied about real people and real events in order to frame them in ways they preferred, but they lied about the lies themselves. And they were fair in their distribution of lies. Tell one lie that presents the media as a victim, the next lie is one that protects a politician or promotes some undeserving charity. Without a doubt, the average American is completely incapable of peeling back these confusing layers to see the truth inside. Okay? I can barely even do it if I try as hard as I can. So, let me move to something that might kind of, I guess, maybe be a good example of this type of thing. Get us thinking in that mode. Get us thinking in the, whoa, there's magic going on. Something's going to come out of this, right? No, it's just nothing. Do you remember when a certain member of the media, Edward Snowden, fled to Russia and wound up hunkered down at the Sheremetyevo airport. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that right. Remember that? Clearly, Snowden was an ally of the media, as the larger media described all his saintly deeds. They were all exposures of government corruption. And key politicians were always available to besmirch Snowden at a moment's notice and label him a traitor. It was a media-feeding frenzy for at least a few days when he turned up at this airport, right? He was escaping the clutches of the evil American government. So, the government was being as corrupt as ever, using baseless threats and terms that would harm Snowden's reputation with the public. And the media was telling lies as usual, to benefit themselves. I'm sure many reporters lied about being on the scene at that airport when they weren't. And there are no checks against these acts. But I'm afraid it's a little weirder than just that. Okay? Simply put, the story of Snowden hiding away at an airport while being stuck in geopolitical limbo, help, is very likely another lie. However, this lie mostly benefits Snowden. Why do I say this? Well, for one, he was in that airport for 40 days, while at times thousands of reporters were sniffing around. And yet, none claimed to have seen him. Nobody even claimed to have heard a rumor that some Russian heard him fart from the next stall in the lavatory. You know what I'm saying? Or heard him respond from behind a knocked door. Mr. Snowden? Nothing. Now, I might be able to accept this as possible, were it not for some added details. For one, he was in what's called the transit area. However, he was able to secure a small windowless room containing a sink, but no bathroom. A British woman by the name of Sarah Harrison, who was affiliated, I believe, with WikiLeaks to some degree, was the one who spirited Edward from Hong Kong to Russia and wound up, as a consequence of that, as his unintended long-term roommate. Right? 40 days, everybody. You and Snowden going to be hanging out, partying, slumber party. And it was her who described having to sneak out to scrounge food from the airport Burger King and washing their clothes in that sink. Right? And even having to relieve themselves in what I presume is a bucket, because I recall that interview being a little, she was trying not to say it outright, but it was clear what she was saying. There wasn't any facilities. So, you have an upset stomach, you've been locked in that air, I'm assuming there were not very good ventilation. Airport air, no windows. They're in there by themselves. Anyway, the scene is ridiculous. Oh, and they never showered and had no visitors over those 40 days. Okay? So, Mr. Upright Whistleblowing Santa Claus man, who gave up everything just for you and me, seems to have no problem telling pointless lies. I'd bet good money that Snowden was sitting very pretty in Putin's Russia at that time. And yet I've not seen a single media outlet question that tall tale. Instead, they enforce it. So this is a great example of what Trump would label fake news, because it's so layered with confusing nonsense and untrackable alliances. It's virtually like magic. It's street theater magic. And I can only conclude with little confidence that the whole Snowden affair is a classic limited hangout scenario. Whether you're tuning in through BitChute, Twitch, Brighteon, or by the grace of God, YouTube, whatever platform, click subscribe right now. Sub this channel.
You can always unsubscribe later.
Then head over to peterklein.live for more info and links to shows on your favorite platform. While working with IMS, I conceived of a concept for what I called the, quote, media restoration church, unquote. In the draft Creed, Discipline, and Bylaws, it contains a basis of union. This is where the bottom line lies, where I attempt to state the problem in as full a manner, and yet in as concise a manner as possible. And this was truly a monolithic task, and it's definitely going to require many rewrites. But it reads in part 1, We believe that modern forms of news and entertainment media are a complex force acting upon the people both positively and negatively. Despite the positive aspects and potential good of this complex force, the harm it causes is so great and pervades so many aspects of the human experience that it constitutes an imminent crisis." Unquote. In my research of Watergate and of other events over the past decade, I've tried to wrap my head around the complex hierarchy of society, specifically government and intelligence organizations. I've never, in all honesty, been able to firmly identify a conspiracy of corruption or great deception during any of recorded history. Despite this, I have massively clear intuition telling me they do exist. And yet, that isn't a controversial view. Even Michael Shermer would likely agree. Michael Shermer, look him up if you don't know who he is. He's skeptical of everything. As I wrap up this episode by focusing on the true nature of the Watergate phenomenon, I think the most important takeaway is something that applies to numerous events that have lodged themselves within the public mind. And trust me, stay tuned. We're maybe less than 10 minutes away from the end here, but this is some of the best material. And we're getting to the bottom of things. I'm kind of concluding here. Great deceptions and horrendous crimes of state are unlikely to require great skill or impeccable discipline. Brilliant strategy is also not required. In fact, I think these are the exceptions. And everything from legendary events in Egypt in the distant past to 9/11, more recent history, are simple in their composition. Now, why I think this is important to state and to consider fully is that many of my colleagues and other respected researchers of conspiracies have a different view. To many, 9/11 and even more simple crimes like simple theft or embezzlement are thought to be complicated, almost to the point of being unsolvable. But that's my point. I actually agree with the idea that they are very complicated. But I strongly suspect the complications are almost entirely due to lack of knowledge of certain systems and of human behavior. Now imagine how wildly different the theories can be between two skilled investigators. One has drifted slowly over a long period of time towards belief in an esoteric nature. The other applies their hands-on knowledge of economics from their past career investigating tax fraud. Okay? The tax guy can solve some state crimes like a rocket through simple follow-the-money tactics and other knowledge of how humans cover up theft generally. But he has zero chance of exposing a conspiracy where a rare alchemical concept was used, or even if a rare drug like scopolamine was used. Likewise, the guy looking for esoteric nature might be the sole person to come even close to understanding the motives in a crime committed by a strange international religious group. But when the crimes involve nothing more complex than check forgery, he may also get lost for years, seeing messages of gematria in the numbers. But getting back to Watergate, using this knowledge, I was able to at least determine that any super complicated tactics or strategy is very unlikely in this case. I think the most complex possibilities involve either double agent tactics or planting of evidence. And what I now believe to be the very most common motive behind any crime of state is simply the cover-up of the crime at hand or the cover-up of past crimes. I'd like you to also expand your picture of planting of evidence to include things reported by the media. You know what I mean? Like planting evidence as in some information in the newspaper or wherever. For example, consider these two phrases reported in relation to Watergate. 1, Watergate break-in, and 2, Watergate burglars. I strongly suspect that men did forcibly gain entry to the DNC offices as reported, so the term break-in would be sound reporting. However, burglary is largely defined as entering a building with intent to steal, to take something, although it does apply when other crimes were intended. So use of the term burglars isn't as appropriate. Here are some rare photos taken on the evening of the break-in while I continue here. Since no motive was established, their intent could have been almost anything. But imagine that instead, 5 men working with the DNC and local law enforcement crafted a plan to stage the break-in, even planning to get caught and arrested. If that were the case, then the aforementioned phrases would be either bad reporting or, if they were aware of these shenanigans, planting of evidence. And I think the so-called break-in was indeed staged, or at minimum used as if it was staged. In either case, the only person everyone identified as benefiting most was Nixon. Another very key angle I uncovered through my research involves a general dispute and battle for control between forces including the State Department and Pentagon, FBI, and CIA. As we look at the faces and affiliations of the key Watergate operatives, consider this. At least 3 very integral people have gone on record saying, in essence, that oftentimes when President Nixon referred to, quote, that Bay of Pigs affair, unquote, he was in fact explicitly referring to the JFK assassination and not the Bay of Pigs affair. Now, why he did that was only partially revealed by the sources, but generally they explained that many people, possibly Nixon himself, thought JFK was killed under orders of the CIA as a consequence for his disagreement with and response to the Bay of Pigs event/invasion. I will add that Nixon certainly didn't use these terms interchangeably with just anyone, only those he was sure understood the ironic connection. I too feel it's more than likely that the CIA is equally responsible for the assassination of JFK, singularly responsible for the Bay of Pigs invasion, and largely responsible for the Watergate affair. With this in mind, look again at our happy guy lineup. A full 7 out of 11 had past or existing CIA relationships. Most critical to consider are James W. McCord, here at the top in the middle, down on the left, Ben Bradley, and to his right, E. Howard Hunt. Some might argue, and legitimately so, that it doesn't make sense that the CIA would arrange a staged event leading to fairly lengthy prison stints for the CIA operatives and other beneficial associates. To that, I can only say, first, clandestine and international operations are known to be fluid. Often, an unlucky conspirator winds up holding the bag. Does the name Jack Ruby ring any bells? I mean, I don't have any data unknown to other researchers. Well, I do, but not relative to this point I'm making. But it's not hard to understand that Ruby was actually doing a great job of holding that bag, just as other operatives, family associates, and persons working under non-official cover have for countless years. Know anything about game theory? Basically, game theory explains that if you're playing a game where to win, you have to have all the money in your colored box, and another player asks you, please hold my money while I go use the restroom. That person who was asked to hold their money will just take that money, put it in their box, and win the game. Now, I won't go into the bizarre and mind-popping details about this, but there's a similar issue with the banks. Have you ever wondered how a bank might transfer physical financial instruments worth billions under high security and confidentiality conditions? Well, the banks did too. And don't go thinking high-tech locks, encryption, or security personnel staff. Think instead of a single CEO or governor, personally taking ownership of the money, carrying it by foot, ceremonially involving a family member, and supernatural forces. So when you also see an established rival, the FBI, as affiliations on our lineup here, Just remember that great rewards come to those who do not snitch. Considering again my theory that the break-in scenario was just staged, what then accounts for Deep Throat? I bet you were wondering when I was finally going to talk about him. Him who? Remember that both our tasty turd nuts maintained that source's identity secret for decades. And that was easy, I would imagine, because he never existed. And it should have been obvious to us all, given how conveniently it was a goofy story point for their stupid President's Men book, which of course became a film starring that horrible Robert Redford. Why does anybody like that guy anyway? I was telling my family on a Zoom call, I hadn't seen them in years, and we did a little trivia thing, and ironically, one of the categories was something involving Robert Redford films, and I said, you know what, I don't think I've ever seen a single film with Robert Redford, and sure as hell I haven't seen all the President's Men, and I won't. On the lower right of our lineup is Mark Felt, who they eventually outed as Deep Throat. But I present as evidence Mark Felt's condition when this was revealed. Yes, it's true, I am Watergate, and Richard Nixon shined my shoes every day as a reward for my services. Lastly, in this presentation, I will address the trials over the cover-up crimes that began only after Nixon had already resigned. There is far too much detail here to even bother covering. But the key takeaway for any daring independent journalist out there is this. The verdicts in those cases, right, the outcomes, and the verdicts in most other cases resulting from political or potential conspiracies of any kind like this one, are not related to the veracity of the events and have little or no relationship to justice. Another consequence of systemic and unbridled corruption within government, within media and related areas, is a judicial system gone wild. No longer does anyone in the know expect a trial to be conducted within the proper framework, or that a prosecutor will be incapable or would rather not present fake evidence, or simply lie, right? Or that a judge can't write a perfectly reasonable decision that results in their predetermined outcome from the start, right? They just connect the dots until they get from point A to point Z, and they can do it in any direction, backwards or forwards. They're very good at that. I heard that from attorneys directly. Judges can write decisions to have any outcome you wish. If those deficits in our legal system aren't enough, then rigged grand juries and special protective measures or secrecy laws preventing the defense from even seeing the evidence should complete the package. Thank you sincerely for watching. Please help by becoming a patron if you can. History is a mystery. 9/11 was an inside job. Skateboarding is not a crime. Fix the media. I understand. Look, it's a new world.
One.